Hello and welcome. I am the Letterhack, and with me now is friend of the show, host of the I Doubt It podcast with co-host Brittany Page and host of Dollemore Daily. Please welcome Jesse Dollemore. Jesse, thanks for being here. How are you?
I am thrilled. Thanks for having me again, Matt. I'm a big fan, so it's always nice to take a little time away from my bullshit to join your bullshit.
I'm just going to hang my hat on that and end the show right here. I don't know if it can get much better than that compliment, but thank you. I do appreciate that. I am also a fan. I wanted to have you on today for the first part in a series that I'm starting called The Real Deal, where I invite folks on to help me check my own tendencies to live in a fantasy world of sorts and of my own making. And in this case, I'm speaking about what the media has been referring to as regretful Trump voters. Headlines since last January, at least, include things like the honeymoon is over, why these Republicans regret their vote, why you shouldn't shame MAGA voters who are just coming to their senses, 11 MAGA supporters who are rethinking their votes, and on and on. From the content I've read about these Trump voters in the, quote, find out phase, while it may be, cathartic to learn about and to hear about, are mostly from anonymous sources. And I personally feel like we talk about MAGA and say things like, how can they be so stupid to vote against their own interest? Or how can we convince them otherwise? And now it's look how regretful they are. And once again, MAGA voters, real or not, flood the media space. And they don't even really have to try. We just talk about them a lot. And I think our time could be spent on more important topics, but I want to process this in the moment and what I think we're seeing and what we believe to be true. So let me start by asking you this. Democrats are catching a lot of heat right now, but
justifiably so.
Yeah, right. I totally agree, especially the leadership.
Yeah.
And nobody is really saying, darn it, maybe we should have listened to progressives. And I know it's laughable. And
yeah, well, it's going to take a while before mainline corporate Democrats come to a realization that, oh shit, maybe we should actually run as progressives, as actual liberals, and not just whatever's going to. Anyway, ask your question. I'm going.
You're right. You're totally right. But if it's true that Trump voters are regretful, that doesn't translate to, they'll vote more wisely next time, right? Do we as progressives and leftists like to convince ourselves that something is happening when it isn't? For just another example, Harris picks Walz as her running mate, and we go, wow, that's a very progressive thing to do. I didn't see any other progressive things after that, really. So do we have a tendency to just read into things and make up our own, outcome or what might be happening?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And I don't think that's a progressive thing or a leftist thing or a liberal thing or a Democrat thing. I think that's a human thing. We want our assertions to be backed up and proven correct. It pains us. There's anxiety and mild trauma involved in being wrong. It's one of the things that, I'm not immediately going into a plug, but it's something that Brittany and I on I Doubt It have really tried to champion for 11 years we've done the show. And it's asking a question of guests is, what's the most recent thing you changed your mind about? Because we shouldn't be embarrassed to change our minds. We should be looking for things to change our mind about when the information changes or when our understanding of previously existing information changes. But to the point about whether we should be talking about, because I have made a calculated decision to cover the stories of Trump supporters, not unnamed, but when there's someone who actually is like, oh shit, I'm getting fucked here, and it's because of Donald Trump. I made a mistake. Oh my God. I made a calculated decision to cover some of those stories because of the fact that it gives other people out there, when they hear about it, permission, like, oh, I've had this idea in the back of my head that Donald Trump fucked me, and I didn't, I'm okay with adult language, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
That it gives them permission within themselves to explore those ideas and give oxygen to the fire of resistance against Donald Trump, finally coming to an understanding that they made a mistake, that they took Donald Trump at his word. They gave him the benefit of the doubt that the things he was saying were accurate and true. And now that he has completely betrayed them, they're they're realizing, people's they're losing their farms. There are real consequences. There's all these Venezuelan immigrants in southern Florida that supported Donald Trump. I mean, they couldn't vote because they're not citizens yet, but they supported his candidacy because they believed the things he said. They gave him the benefit of the doubt when no benefit of the doubt should have been granted to Donald Trump, because he is a proven a fascist liar. So I do think there's efficacy in a round. Finally getting to my answer, I do think there's efficacy in talking about the Trump voters who are regretful, because it gives people permission to also think that.
Okay, so ultimately, because you're right, there are people who are there, hey, there was the guy, I was reading USA Today recently, and then all of a sudden it was everywhere over that weekend, where the guy and his new bride were coming back from their honeymoon from Puerto Rico, which is part of America, and they grabbed her because she wasn't white. Turned out she got detained, and that guy ends up saying, yeah, I think this is bad, I don't know what to do, when he probably should have been saying, what did I do? Right?
Yeah, that's the guy he's the odd man out, to coin the phrase, to use the phrase, who didn't say, oh yeah, I fucked up, I voted for Trump. He was like, I would still vote for Donald Trump again if given the chance, even though they've arrested his wife and detained her, and they're likely going to deport her to wherever she's from. She wasn't Puerto Rican, they were on vacation. And so it's just, this is jackbooted thugs. Rumesa Ozturk yesterday being arrested by plainclothes masked individuals, just jackbooted armed agents of the state, descending on this young grad student for writing an op-ed in which, I just talked about it on my show, so I have the quote here. She wrote in an op-ed, where is it? For the dignity, we as graduate students affirm the equal dignity and humanity of all people. And that was enough to get her arrested, detained, and likely shipped out of the country, having broken no laws and being here legally. She's a legal immigrant to the United States of America. So it's not just the rapists, I assume some are good people. It's not that. They're just going after brown people who don't agree with this administration. They're searching people's phones when they enter the country. This is Nazi shit. Yeah. And when you see a group of plainclothes, I know I'm ranting, but when you see a group of plainclothes assholes, there is a moment to resist, and that is the moment. This excuse in 10 years when we were just following orders. Yeah, we also know of a group of people back in the 40s who just followed fucking orders, and what came of that? I'm not having it.
Yeah, and so I'm curious now, because if I were there watching people unidentified in plain clothes walk up to a woman, I would intervene. I'd be like, whoa, what is this shit? Yeah. What would you do in that moment? Would you intervene? Or?
Well, I think it would be more of a act first and act questions later, and then I would be arrested for doing something. But here's what you do. This is another thing. Again, I have this in front of me because I just finished recording for my show. This happened in Washington, D.C. yesterday. This is alert. ICE activity has been reported, and this is from Blue Sky, in Adams Morgan, which is a neighborhood here in Washington, D.C., this morning on 3/26. Homeland Security agents showed up at H.D. Cook Elementary School and tried to detain a school employee as they got out of the car. The agents did not show a warrant, and other employees, and this is the part that I want everybody to listen to, and other employees managed to intervene and prevent the arrest. Immediately upon Rumesa's arrest, her detainment, these posters went up everywhere. Let me get in the camera here. There was a rally in Somerville, Massachusetts, which is the suburb across the river from Boston, where Tufts University is, where people were holding signs and they rallied for her freedom. We need to come together and organize and stand in the gap for people who don't have a voice, who are being abused and oppressed and arrested by these fucking fascists. It's on us. Every single one of us has an obligation, like this lady. Her sign says, when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes a duty.
Yes. Amen. There you go. Okay.
And listen, I say this very tongue in cheek because I don't feel lucky to live in Washington, D.C., but we're lucky enough to live in Washington, D.C., where we can participate in some of these protests. We were down at the Treasury building. We were down at the Labor Department. We've been at several, both with cameras and without, and we're doing everything we can. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us, if you have the energy and the resources to do so, to protest.
Yeah, my hope is that the South will unionize to a degree more this summer, and I will be there on the ground covering that. Okay, let's talk about policy. and because, look, if these voters, real or not, if
they're real. Come on, man.
But this is the thing. They build it up. They build the story around one or two actual people and then start quoting all these. There was Washington Post and New York Times both said, not a big fan of Elon, ordinary conservative voters disturbed by Doge destruction of government. Interviews with dozens of voters showed an organic irritation with MAGA politics. They don't name
I get
any
that.
of them.
There are certain, with any story and any narrative that gets spun by media, there are going to be elements of it that you're like, they're not naming anybody. But there have been dozens of stories where they've interviewed people, where there've been on video, on where they've actually named the people who have lost their farms, people whose relatives are being deported, people who are being impacted by the tariffs that they didn't think would impact them, federal workers who have lost their jobs, veterans. People are not fucking happy because they didn't believe Donald Trump or didn't pay attention enough during the campaign, and they regret what they. So it's real.
And I guess
it is happening. Maybe not to the degree that the media would like to, because it's getting clicks and they're getting paid for those headlines, but it is happening.
I guess we could also assume that they would be wary of mentioning their own names and doxing themselves, because if they are regretful, they may also be scared. Like a lot of people.
That's a very real fear. I mean, we have masked, jackbooted thugs patrolling neighborhoods. It's alarming.
And if they voted for that, then maybe they would be on the, in the line of fire, so to speak, if they spoke out not anonymously. So, okay, so let's say that there's a moment where, and seriously, I am of the mind that you cannot change their vote ultimately. They will continue to vote Republican, and I'll ask you about that dynamic in a moment. But let's say that these voters truly believed the populist things that their con man president was telling them. Can we get them to join us? Because, when you believe populist things like we're going to take care of the working man and healthcare and your kids and educate, when despite what they're doing, that's what they were sold. Can we now get them to join us to fight and nag their congresspersons for what we would call progressive policies, which are actually just basic human rights? Can we get people from the Republican voting base to at least join us in fighting for policies like wages, healthcare, protecting Social Security, etc.?
Yes. I mean, the answer flatly is yes, but it's not an easy yes. It's a heavy lift. It's a difficult task. It's Herculean, in fact. What we need, it's a messaging thing, and we need to stop running the Democratic Party and our candidates as though they are Republican light. We need to stop filling primetime slots at the Democratic National Convention with current registered Republicans like Kamala Harris did this time. It's not the sole reason she lost, but it's up there in the top 5, I believe. Had she run as a progressive, I think we would have had a different result. When they do polling and they describe policies and they don't put a label on it, progressive policies are roundly desirable for the majority of Americans, including Republicans. Like you said, sticking up for the working class. There is a spirit of class solidarity that people have in this country. They just don't recognize it as a progressive idea. And that's what we need to tap into is the very real harms. We need to describe what these tax cuts are for billionaires, for the richest. We also need to teach people what a billionaire is, that you will never be a billionaire. You will never be a billion. You will never have $1,000 million. And that's just $1 billion. Right. Elon Musk has $400,000 million.
He can lose $30 billion in a day.
$1 million a day, and we would be
for like
several
100 years.
yeah, 1,000. I mean, Jesus, it's insane. So we need to get that through to people, but also just the fact that we need to bust the myth of meritocracy, that this Elon Musk is not special. He's not a genius. He's not smarter than anybody else. He is just exceedingly fucking lucky. He turned a giant pile of money into an even larger pile of money. That's what he did. The same with Donald Trump, who was given hundreds of millions of dollars by his father, was on the payroll since he was 3 years old, like $200,000 a year or some nonsense. These people aren't self-made. They're just not. And if we can get that across to people, we could change hearts and minds.
Well, there you go. Amen. And I mean, you can't really acquire that much money without some sort of long list of casualties, right? Whether it's people who took a hit or actual lives lost. That's just how it works. But when I say us, like join us, and I saw a couple of comments in the chat asking about this, I mean literally you and I, people who advocate for progressive policy and values, but I also mean people who were sounding the alarm on behalf of the people who voted for Trump anyway. I mean the people who were saying, no, you're voting against your own interest. You are voting against the interest of all the people that you claim to represent, right? It's not just you as an individual. And I think that they're very short-sighted and they can't see past their own needs. And they are giving in to fear-mongering. And so you're right. I think it is some Herculean lifting to do, because there are layers to the con. One, it's exploiting their fears and anxiety about the other and immigration.
Sure.
And then, like that woman who wrote the piece for Tufts, are we safer on the streets now? That's a ridiculous notion to imply. But like also there are, as you say, working class people who we tried to show solidarity with and said, look, it's not left and right, it's bottom up. Like, we really do need to start, if it's us versus them, it's us versus the people you just got elected. And now Elon Musk and his teenage cronies, I think they're barely adults, but I call them teenagers because you don't just turn 18 and you're magically an adult. I'm sorry. That's not how it works.
Well, your prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. Your brain is not fully matured until you're like 25 or something. So, but let me say this. I think there's also a problem on our side, and that is people are so anti-establishment that it's like the feature of their fucking personality. They're so anti. So this notion that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, like if you're somebody who uses the word uniparty, you need to reevaluate how you think about things, because if it's a uniparty, then what's taking place in Gaza right now under Donald Trump, which is far worse than what it was during Joe Biden, which was a terrible fucking abdication of his role as a president who stands in the gap for people who are being brutalized in a genocide. Joe Biden fucked it up. Kamala Harris didn't message hard enough. She fucked it up. But there's a gulf, an ocean of distance between how the Republican Party is going to handle this and other things, and how the Democratic Party is going to handle it. So we need to check ourselves about also giving people permission in their minds to think that there's no difference between the two parties, because the differences are vast. Women are bleeding the fuck out to death in their cars in emergency room waiting rooms because they can't get health care. They can't be given a DNC, a reproductive health care procedure. And that would not be happening if Hillary Clinton had won in 2016. As much as I held my nose and voted for Hillary Clinton, we just wouldn't be in this fucking this state. So to the people left of me, there are many, I would just really challenge people to think differently.
Bernie Sanders says, if you're going to run as independent. Do you think there's an opportunity here for people to swoop in where the red and blue are failing and vote third party or independent, or at least run?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got to be a pretty special person. Bernie's the 1 in a million, 1 in a billion type of character. And to do it, he also is in an area of the country geographically and historically and culturally where, you know, Maine has a lot of independent spirit in it. Vermont, New Hampshire, it's just, that's kind of the culture there. But yeah, I mean, if you don't feel like the party machine and troubling with getting funding for your campaign and everything else, yeah, run as an independent. But it's an uphill battle because of the fact that the way our two-party system, if an idea comes to fruition, if an idea starts gaining steam, one of the two parties will gobble that up into their platform and then make it their own, kind of stealing it from the other party. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's why when I see people like Kat Abu Ghazaleh out of Illinois,
Kat Abu,
now. Yeah, and I'm really trying to say the full name. No,
yeah, I think
she says Abu. You're right. Yeah,
Kat Abu. Yeah. Because I don't know how to pronounce her last name because I'm just fucking the worst.
Right, and I can't pronounce my own last name, but it's perfect. It's the perfect video. Everything's perfect, and then here I am being the little bit better guy saying, why not add that one quick line somewhere in that announcement that if you're in my district and you're not voting for a Democrat, or you won't vote for me because I'm running as a Democrat, then just listen to this. We're not going to agree about everything. Where we disagree, we'll have that conversation. And where we agree, we will continue to make progress. See what I mean? Like, just give me that. It's not catering to the right wing like Rahm Emanuel wants the Democrats to do, or Gavin Newsom. It's letting them know that once elected, I work for all of you. Like, it's that simple, right? And I think people forget that, and they're like, oh, well, now that, like, my pen pal's Lindsey Graham, that's who I have to write letters to. That's who I have to call, right?
But at least you have a senator. I live in Washington, D.C., where I am taxed and not represented.
Yeah, that's
something
weird.
That, I don't know, it seems very familiar that maybe we fought a revolution because of that same fucking thing, and here we are.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. Whenever I think about that, I'm like, I don't know what to think about that.
Listen, on the Kat Abu thing and the reaching out to those who don't follow whatever label that she is not or is, that's, I think, where retail politics comes in, where you go door knocking as a candidate and you talk to people and you press the flesh, you make eye-to-eye contact, and you make a connection with the voter. A lot of ground can be covered there, where you're engendering trust and familiarity, and then that through word of mouth, like, oh, hey, I met Kat. She came to the door and I talked to her and she was great. I trust her. It's, oh, you trust her. I trust you. By the transitive property, I guess I can trust her too. That can be done not from a YouTube video or an announcement speech, but through retail politics, I think. But what the fuck do I know? I'm just a pumpkin head,
or do it all.
Yeah,
I don't know.
For sure. I mean, you need to diversify the messaging, because some people aren't going to be answering the door to some politician and they only exist online. Thank you, people who are existing only online. That's great.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Will Trump voters use Elon Musk to, as the evil billionaire scapegoat and continue to look at Trump as the hero, or continue to foster that narrative that Trump's really the good guy? It was Elon that messed everything up. Elon himself is doing this.
There's certainly an element of MAGA world, because it's a cult. It meets all the criteria of a cult. All the hallmarks of a cult. It's a fucking cult. It is. He is their dear leader. They've literally made golden statues of Donald Trump and wheeled them into CPAC. It's weird. So there's certainly an element that will not be moved off their position of loving and worshiping Donald Trump. But there's a contingent of support for Donald Trump that will evaporate. It'll come first from the independents, and then it'll come from more party-aligned individuals. But what's going to happen is people are going to remember the promises of Donald Trump, not the cult, but there will be a certain segment who will remember the promises of Donald Trump, the promises that prices would go down, the prices that eggs would go down and gas would go down, that inflation would go down, that the stock market would go up, that their retirement accounts would be just pressed down, shaken, running together. Well, there's a scripture in the Bible that talks, I come from that stock. So pressed down, shaken together, and running over. That's the scripture. That they would be, it's going to be good times for everybody. And then when it doesn't happen, they're going to be like, wait, what happened to all that economic, golden age of America talk, which is something he said yesterday. And they will peel off from supporting. Now, they may come back when another candidate comes around. I'm an optimist. I'm a positive thinking guy. I am, but to a fault, maybe. I think I've said that before with you on your show, but I'm more I don't want to say depressed. It sounds so brr, but I'm bummed. I was very bummed by the outcome of this election and by while it was a plurality and not a majority, goddamn, very, very despondent over our fellow Americans who bought the bullshit. And whether it be through racism, I think racism played an outsized role in this. Again, the media is trying to play this as economic anxiety and all this nonsense when Kamala Harris put forward strategies and policies that would help people of color and people who are marginalized and traditionally oppressed. And there's a large contingent of white people who are like, what? A black person's going to get helped out? And it would help out me too? Well, nah, I'm not going to support that because they need to have some pain. Racism is just, it's endemic. It's just a part of the fabric of our culture. And it was no more evident to me. And look, being a white guy who's lived a white life with white privilege, I should have been more attuned that, yeah, this is a real possibility. And it snuck by me. I was bummed.
Yeah. And I think that's the last thing we're going to be able to combat. In the meantime, if we can't make people less racist, we can get them to probably stop watching so much Fox News, right? Which is just opinion and not real news. Like I want to continue to make that argument, even on a person-to-person, case-by-case basis on the streets, right? But we'll see. We won't stop fighting, even though it may seem hopeless at times. Look, Jesse, thanks for coming on the show. There are
Thanks
links
for having me.
Yeah, anytime. And there are links in the description for folks to follow and support your work. I highly encourage that. You and Brittany Page both are doing great work.
Do you think your audience, I've got it going live here, there's a bunch of people in the chat, you think they would enjoy me having you on the show to talk about a topic or two on my show?
Yes. I guarantee my audience and anyone who doesn't will be banned immediately. I think everyone would resoundingly applaud. Yeah, we're getting a lot of yeses now.
Well, good.
In all caps. This is very good. No, I would take you up on that anytime. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That's a tremendously kind offer.
Yeah, we'll make that happen.
Great. All right. Consider me available. But here's my final question. Are we creating our own reality in lack of a more tangible, progressive world? Where do you think we've landed on this? Or are we as realistic as we can be, all things considered?
I don't know that I'm smart enough to fully understand what the specific question is, but let me say this. This is adjacent to the question. We're still in the fight relative to having the progressive element of the Democratic Party win, because we still have Chuck Schumer, whose plan, his publicly stated plan is, just wait till 2026, y'all. These Republicans are going to be fleeing like rats on a sinking ship. Like they're going to be embarrassed. That's not how Republicans operate who are elected. They are shameless and dignity-free characters in this simulation that we exist in. And to wait until 2026, that's the plan. He is abdicating his role as a leader, and there's not much more effort being done by Hakeem Jeffries. We need hopefully AOC is ready for her moment, because once these septuagenarians disavail themselves of life or whatever, just through attrition of our existence and our mortality, we're going to need leaders. And I hope there are people like her who are ready to step up. I know they are, but we need more AOCs and fewer Chuck Schumers and Hakeem Jeffries.
And as these folks come along, these candidates, as they challenge away, we will continue to promote them and broadcast and amplify and whatever we got to do to get voters switched on to what is actually happening. Jesse, thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate you.
Have a great day, man. Jesse Dollemore, two things: great vocabulary, great third jacket. So we're here today to check my cynicism and keep me from drifting off into fantasy lefty land, where I believe something that may or may not be true, just based on, my own cynical nature. The more we hear about so-called regretful Trump voters and MAGAs supposedly finding themselves in the F around and find out phase,
right?
I keep scratching my head, and they're mostly anonymous sources. There are a few actual and anonymous sources, anonymous quotes. And so I wonder if they are even real at all, or if this is the mainstream media's attempt at creating headlines around manufactured hot topics. What do you think? Is there any validity to that, or am I being cynical? Are they real people filled with regret, or what?
So I think the question is, whatever percentage of Trump voters from this most recent election regret their vote, what percentage of them are really going to consider voting Democrat next cycle, whether it be in the midterms or in 2028? And I think it's a very small percentage. I'm actually with you with your cynicism. I think no matter what their expressed regrets are now, they might vote against Trump in 26, and he might lose the House. But JD Vance runs, or if Trump runs again in 28, I think they're going to find a reason to vote for him. I think they're going to find a reason to not vote for the Democrats for the most part. It'll probably be enough to sway the election. I think 2028 will be a lot like 2008, where W was radioactive by the end of his second term, and whoever that Democratic nominee was going to be president, whether it was Obama or Clinton. So I think this 2028 primary will be the exact same thing. Whoever comes out of that Democratic Party primary will win the election, but I don't think they'll win because of Trump converts. I think they'll win because of turnout.
So I hate to imagine this out loud, but let's imagine Donald Trump and this administration somehow, some way don't allow for legit elections or elections at all in 2028. Let's just say that's the case. Do people who voted for him previously go, no, that's fine, we'll have a king? Or do you think that they revolt in some way?
I think the vast majority are in the cult. I think that the best way to define MAGA, I do this on my show, as I say, there's a famous acting coach named Stanislavski who said that generality is the death of art, which implies that specificity is the key to a good story. Well, if you work with people in business too, you find out that specificity is the key to great analysis. So who are MAGA? I did a whole series on this. Who are MAGA? Who are these people? How can you identify them outside of if they're not wearing a MAGA hat or a MAGA shirt, right? And I say there are four groups. One is heartless 1%ers, the billionaire class. It's really the heartless 0.1%ers, and they're in control of the party. Their agenda is what reigns supreme in terms of the purpose of the GOP, right? Lower taxes for 1%ers and corporations, excessive military spending, deregulation, and politicization of our courts according to right-wing fundamentalist Christian values. For that reason, and then, so that's one group. That's the most important, powerful group. And then the other three groups are like three overlapping circles in a Venn diagram, where some of them are one, some of them are two, some of them are all three. It's Confederate flag waving, Bible beating, gun nuts. Those three types of people will never vote Democrat. The Bible beaters because of abortion, the Confederate flag wavers because of the racism, and the gun nuts because of the NRA's extremely good job of installing paranoia into the public psyche of all gun owners, thinking that any new gun law is a bad gun law. So when you define MAGA, the MAGA base, the core of MAGA, as heartless 1%ers manipulating Confederate flag waving, Bible beating gun nuts into voting against their socioeconomic interests, then I think you can get down to the core of what the Republican Party really is. And if you look at the numbers, and the election denial from 2020 was the best way to do this. At that point in time, it was about 2/3 of the GOP was Confederate flag waving, Bible beating gun nuts. This most recent election implies that it's closer to like 75%, maybe as high as 80% right now. Now, those people are never moving. So I think to your overall point of these regretful Trump voters, there's anywhere from 5 to 15 to 20% maybe of the voters that came out in 2024 that are maybe willing to consider at this moment voting Democrat or not voting Republican. But again, like I said, I grew up in a conservative household. You're in a conservative area. Their feelings change. Their in the moment feelings can be swayed. What they're feeling now, they are so susceptible to mass mediated manipulation that they could forget about the tariffs. Like, oh, the tariffs weren't so bad, and Biden's was worse, or transgender, women in men's sports, or transgender men in women's sports. Like, they get distracted so easily that they're not reliable. So I think you're wise in that mainstream media keeps putting all the attention on the regretful Trump voters. And it's like, well, what about the people who said, I told you so? What about the people who said that Trump was going to be a disaster? What about the people that said that Project 2025 was for real? I mean, Indivisible, who you might have heard of, hosted a webinar not soon after Trump got elected, and people were starting to express regret for voting for him. And he said, don't tell people I told you so. And I was like, actually, that's exactly what I want to do right now, so that we can get them kind of tenderized and ready to admit that their entire worldview is flawed. And that's what I worry long term about MAGA is I think MAGA has the obvious potential to be a verdict on the alt-right, on the extreme right. But I have a feeling 2, 4, 8 years from now, conservatism is still going to have a legitimate intellectual foothold in public discourse. Extreme conservatism's bad, but good conservatism is moderate conservatism. And I'm here to say no. MAGA is a verdict on all of conservatism. It is the natural devolution of conservatism into fascism. There is nothing good about blind faith resistance to change in a world that is defined by change. Our entire world, our entire global economy, our entire society is defined by change. So we should be predisposed to embrace it, not to resist it. It should be, the conversation should be, what kind of change do we want in this country, as opposed to, do we even want change? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you make some great points. And I see two things happening a lot. One, in my personal sphere on the street where I live, and the other is in the mainstream media and the narratives that are built up in online. On a personal ground level view, I see people saying Trump has a plan. I don't understand it, but he has a plan. And that sounds exactly like what overtly religious people say about God. Yeah, it doesn't make sense. Yeah, they took away a loved one at an early age, but I trust that he has a plan. I just don't understand it because we're not supposed to understand it. And that leads me to recalling the notion that if it is a cult, it's very religion-like, and that a step away from Trump and what they see as good is only a step toward evil, not toward something that could also be good, just different in terms of policy and legislation. So it's very muddy and weird and becomes mystical, and I don't like that at all. And I am starting to be of the mind where I can just say, hey, I disqualify you from even having a casual conversation about this topic.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm walking away. You need to learn more before you can talk about this. And then the other thing that's happening is like you were saying, the media just cannot help but make the case for good Republicans or misunderstood voters or voters who misunderstood. And it's just a way of keeping basically just like, more white conservative Republican voices in the spotlight before, during, and after elections. And I wonder if they are critical, let's say that they are critical of the way things are going, are they likely to employ a scapegoat like Elon Musk or ICE and say, look, they're just doing things too broadly. It needs to be more with a scalpel or more surgical for it to work right. And that's not Trump's fault. Do you think that they are likely to say, oh, it's Musk, not Trump or something?
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable expectation. Look, I try to simplify things down, and I'm realizing that I'm actually pretty good at it with metaphors. But essentially, MAGA are overgrown children with votes and guns, intellectually, emotionally, even spiritually. They're underdeveloped human beings. Now, you can treat a child who's throwing a temper tantrum, in a number of different ways. But what the mainstream media does is, oh, are you okay? Oh, are you okay? How are you feeling today, conservatives? Are you ready to kind of get with change? Because we've been trying to get you with change for 45 years and you're still not listening, right? That's one way to treat a child throwing a temper tantrum. That's the wrong way. Okay, the right way is go to your room. When you calm down, then we will talk and I will explain to you why you can't get what you want when you want it. That's how you treat a child throwing a temper tantrum. And that's what we need to do to MAGA. Sit down, shut up, let the smart people go to work. And I'm not seeing anybody on the left really take that approach. What I'm seeing is a lot of Bernie and AOC going into these areas. Some of them are friendly, some of them are not so friendly in terms of just the red or blue area that they're in, right? The voting demographic that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not going on the attack. They're saying, oh, this is what the government does. It's like an educational tour where they're having to educate people, give people a crash course in the fundamentals of government.
You think
and
it's
why government's important. Yes, there it is. That's a good way of putting it. It's like putting your arm around him. Oh, I know it's okay. I know you fucked up. Let me help you. It's like, no. Shut up. Here's how you, I was taught in a very simple but hard way growing up. Here's what you're doing wrong. Here's how to do it better. That was the teaching methodology, because I'm the teacher and you're the student. And that's the dynamic that I want to see the left take, is invoke superiority. And it's not that we're superior citizens because we're so amazing. It's we're superior citizens simply because we didn't vote for fascism and we didn't try to rationalize fascism. We saw fascism coming. So if you want to help make America great, listen, because you have a lot to learn about the structure and forms of government, and you are still stuck in the past with this fairy tale of America at one point being a fair and equal opportunity society, and it's garbage.
Where it was, more racist than ever. But I think that the other thing that the media should be doing is saying, I told you so on our behalf. They should be saying, it shouldn't just be former CNN host Don Lemon, who on his own podcast going, I think maybe I am progressive. Maybe I should have listened to progressives more when I had that mainstream job. They should be saying, okay, I admit failure, which is hard to do and probably not likely, but maybe we shouldn't have been condemning progressives as hurting the Democrats' chances at beating Republicans, when in fact they did that to themselves by not listening to progressives. There's the I told you so in a more articulate way that I think could be in attack ads, could be flooding the zone with that sort of messaging.
Yes.
And so okay, let's say that maybe some of these folks are coming to their senses. Maybe some of these folks are pissed off. I mean, we see them at town halls. There are a few people in articles where their spouses have been taken away from them and deported or detained at a minimum. And they're like, they were going through the process of immigration. What's the deal? Well, the deal is that this is all bullshit and unfair, and you're just finding out. But they also will say, I'm not necessarily changing my vote. It's just my right to be upset in this moment.
Right.
And me, and the spotlight's on me. So can we exploit those potential fractures by getting these folks, whether it's at a big level, like through campaigning or something like that, or the protest, or even just like at church, in the grocery store, at work, your neighbors, can we get these people? Can we easily convince them that now is the moment where they need to join us on certain policy instead
Yeah.
of just saying, well, you shouldn't have voted that way. Maybe you should vote differently next time. Can we move them to call their representatives and make demands and show up at their offices and do more transactional advocacy for certain policy that we are already agreeing with? Because, at the end of the day, populism is progressive policy.
Yes,
It's just
sure is.
fake. So, I mean,
Sure is.
if can we, and how do you think we could do that?
If the Democratic Party can successfully rebrand itself as a post-Clinton, a post-Obama, a post-Biden, a post-neoliberal party, if that progressive message can include the distinction between neoliberal and progressive, because I believe that most people on the left who consider themselves liberal, because what does that word even mean anymore? If you actually sat them down and talked about policies, they'd be progressive. By like your Don Lemon example, he's like, oh, well, I've looked at these policies and it's basically FDR's second Bill of Rights. And why not? These things all sound like a pretty good society. Why wouldn't we be for these things? So I think it has to do with rebranding. Now, the best way to rebrand an institution is to rebrand its people, meaning replace its people. So I think if the Democratic Party can get generational change within the ranks of the party, at least going to Gen Xers, preferably, I think we need to leapfrog Gen Xers and go right to millennials, because I think Gen Xers are too capitalist. And I think millennials are the most empathetic generation since the greatest generation. For a variety of reasons. We're children of 9/11, the 2008 housing crisis. Like, we have gotten a raw deal a number of times, and we're very aware of what the baby boomers did. Resentment and blame have a place in American politics. In fact, they have a really big place. And I talk about it in the Why Kamala Lost episode of losers do not deserve our sympathy, because losers are people that could win but don't, because they don't learn from their previous losses. So blame it on the baby boomers. The baby boomer conservatives are sociopaths. The baby boomer liberals are losers. They didn't do enough to keep at bay conservative messaging, or conservative policy. So to answer your question, I think it's possible. But the question is, does the Democratic Party have the balls to start encouraging younger, angrier, sexier nominees like Kat Abou-Ghazalia out of Illinois? Do they have the guts to start to not only, accept that these primary challenges are going to happen, but to even encourage them? And the Democratic Party has a culture of deference to established power. So if you're trying to primary someone who's established, I mean, it's still haunting AOC that she took out Nancy Pelosi's good friend and Joe Crowley, So there needs to be a huge amount of change in terms of the brand, and that has to do with coming to terms with the legacy of the baby boomer Democratic Party. And I say that politics is Star Wars, policy is Star Trek, political marketing is Jurassic Park, because you got to kill dinosaurs.
That's awesome.
And the dinosaurs that we got to kill right now are Reagan and Clinton. Reagan, government is not the problem. Conservatism is the problem. Government is good because people are good. That's how you deal with Reagan. Clinton, you took the party of FDR and transformed it into the party of conservative capitulation.
Yeah.
and you stole the brand. I mean, undoing the Telecom Act, repealing of Glass-Steagall. These were FDR moments of history that really protected the American public from the exploitation of capitalism. And what did Clinton do? He caved on all of them. The era of big government is over. This is the essay that I'm working on now, the DNC divide, the neoliberalism versus progressivism. And I think if more people knew what that distinction was, then they would consider themselves progressive and they would be on board. So if you can convince most of America that this is a new Democratic Party, that this is an angrier Democratic Party, this is a Democratic Party that's not going to be afraid to call stupid stupid. It's not going to be afraid to call ignorant ignorant. It's not going to be afraid to call Marjorie Taylor Greene a white trash demon. Like, I mean, enough. The Republican Party is an instrument of evil. There is nothing good that comes from working with it. And bipartisanship is dead. And that's the real mechanical adjustment that I think we need to see in the Democratic Party is no more bipartisanship. If we have any power, we are going to use it to restrain the Republican Party because there's nothing good that comes from it. Nothing.
Yeah. When they're in the minority, the Democratic Party could at least turn Congress into a procedural minefield where nothing gets done. But instead, they start cooperating. You know, I think that look, I got to find this study. I got to track this down and do a segment on it. If you're going to be sympathetic about any voting generation of voters, it might be Gen X, because there's a study that showed that in terms of lead poisoning, they suffered the most, and that might explain a lot. Crime rates, poor voting choices now, current day. But I also want to start every conversation with conservatives with, look, I hate Hillary Clinton too. I don't like Chuck Schumer either. I think Nancy Pelosi is a useless, multimillionaire benefiting from insider trading as well. There are things that we agree on that we can easily just kind of like get out of the way and then move on to, but you get mail. You want the post office to come to your rural grandmother's house and give her medication, right? We have to fight for that shit. So I think there are things that we can immediately find common ground on and then start to.
But you got to kill Reagan there. You got to kill Reagan there.
You need to massage that in. Yeah.
They are convinced that government is the problem, because who doesn't hate the DMV? Who doesn't hate paying their taxes?
When it's run by the people, when it's by and for the people, it is good. Government isn't, this form of government is bought off and paid for. It's not actually what government is. And so you can't paint government in general as bad. I don't like American imperialism. That doesn't mean that I don't like America. You know what I mean? So there are things worth fighting for. And otherwise, why are we having the conversation, buddy? Right? Well, that's what I would say to the person. Why are we talking about this at all if it doesn't matter? I feel suspicious, and they are often anonymous sources and quotes and random posts from social media talked about in relation to stories about actual yet far fewer people. And in that moment, you know, being detained at borders, coming back from Canada or Puerto Rico vacations, wherever. And I just wonder if they're real, or if this is the mainstream media's attempt at creating headlines around sort of a manufactured hot topic. So what do you think? Is there any validity to my skepticism here, or am I just being cynical?
This is a really great question, because I see on, like, I don't watch it, but I see clips of like MSNBC and CNN, and it seems that the narrative they're going with is that Trump and Elon and a lot of members of Trump's cabinet are incompetent, that it's stupidity. This tariffs chart they came out with, it's just, they don't know what they're doing. They asked ChatGPT, that's how dumb they are. And I'm really worried we're mistaking like evil for stupid here. I think Trump is very intentional about what he's doing. Do his supporters, you know, back his evil plans? No, I think it's an implicit trust that they have. Actually, I think they're genuinely right now based on the thousands of comments I have on my videos about the Trump administration and what they're up to. They're believing really that he has some master plan and it's all going to work out, and that they are willing to take temporary short-term prices going up and inflation and the economy getting worse for whatever Trump has in store, whether that's sticking it to China or making America #1 in manufacturing again. They implicitly trust him. I have not received comments or DMs from any Trump supporters, or, talk to them out here in Iowa, that are saying, I really messed up. So I don't know if it's real. I certainly don't see it.
I wouldn't put it past the media to have anonymous sources that, are, oh, well, I asked my friend a question and they gave me a vague answer. That's my anonymous source. I don't know. Or split up multiple quotes from one people, or you're talking to a few people and you hear one thing and you say, well, that's 3 sources. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past them. And, that's just clickbait, really. But in terms of having a master plan, this is what I always kind of look at as faith-based politics. It's kind of like, well, God has a plan for us. He works in mysterious ways. It's not up for our little baby brains to understand it. We just hope it works out. Do you think it has something to do with like the large amount of evangelicals who are also voting for Donald Trump, and pastors at churches bringing politics into sermons and stuff like that more and more, and say, you got to vote for Donald Trump, he'll save us from the devil? Do you think it's kind of like that? Like they're just blurring the lines?
I think it's totally like that for a lot of them. And whether it's because they grew up in one of these evangelical households and maybe they don't go to church now, but their brain's been kind of wired in that way of trust this higher power, whether it's this politician who gilds everything in gold and is very representative of this sort of oligarchic class in America of people who have inherited wealth from their parents. And, he squandered a lot of it, but people still see him in that role of like a big famous businessman, and he understands the economy. And so we don't need to look into it. And it's interesting because, there is this whole, those who bless Israel will be blessed. We see the evangelicals really supportive of a pro-Israel policy when a lot of the right has been convinced, partly by like political commentators they listen to, that the spending in Ukraine is not justified, that we don't need to defend them. But for some reason, we're giving Israel a bunch of money to be on the offensive, and that's okay. And I really think directly the evangelical beliefs support that. But also just the trusting of Trump because he's Trump, because he's this figure, and God saved him from that bullet. That really did something to a lot of these folks. And so that's scary. And it's fascinating that this group of Trump supporters that's very upset about the transgender, they've made it an issue. I don't want to say transgender issue because it really wasn't before they made it one. But why are they so willing to seek out scientific studies that show that there's some kind of like mental health damage for people who transition and among the LGBTQ plus community, and ignore like the social context that maybe the mental health issues are the bullying and not just being trans in itself, and the society around being trans is the problem? There's not that critical thinking, but there is the like pursuit of scientific evidence in a really technical way. If you talk to a lot of conservatives, which I did on the Hills show Rising about this, they're very willing to read scientific studies. Why are they willing to go so deep technically into the transgender rights issue, but not the economy? Not question like, is he bringing about an era that's going to be good for working class people? Maybe we should look into it. Equally technical field, but for some reason, and this is an issue of economics outside of the Trump world, it's seen as some very smart guys who have studied math are going to sit up in their tower and do the calculation, and that's why we can't have nice things, and it's infinitely correct, and their tools are always accurate, which is just not the case. And so I think just Trump's team has recognized that in America and really taken advantage of it to rig the economy for the oligarchs, really.
I'd rather skydive from the moon than do math. So I get it. But punching down and hating is way too easy. And I think that's a lot of it. And I think this is why people um will stand up to Democrats, but maybe not stand up to Republicans, because
Mm.
the Democrats are seen as, well, if they're weak, we can keep punching at them, right? We can make them weaker. Whereas the other guys are really powerful because they keep winning and they're in charge, and oh, they have a mandate. But I wonder, do you think that so hate, unfortunately, very powerful, but do you think that we're going to end up seeing scapegoats? And you kind of already see this, where people are like, wow, Elon Musk is really making Trump look bad. Oh, really? Who do you think is letting him do this? Right? Like, oh, I wish ICE was using more of a scalpel and we're more surgical about who they're detaining and deporting. They're making Trump look bad. Do you think that people are willing to use a scapegoat to, for the dear leader in this case? Or is there a chance that he's going to take the responsibility as it rolls downhill?
Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to think that the average Trump supporter is gonna look at his actions and judge them for what they are. Um, Super willing to accept any scapegoat. If Trump says Elon has caused some problems in the White House and he's got to go and he's made some decisions that we don't agree with that have caused problems that you've seen and felt in your lives, whether it's Social Security or cuts to Medicare or you rely on the VA. I think when people start feeling the real effects of Doge and what's happened there, Trump's going to be able to conveniently say, Elon did this and it was a mistake and it's going to take, I don't know if it's fixable, you know?
Right.
And that's a really convenient narrative for someone who doesn't want people to have the benefits that they paid into. And so I think that's very likely because we've seen Trump do this before. I mean, the moment Mike Pence wasn't willing to break his constitutional duty of confirming the election results, Trump was done with him and so was his base. And it was all his fault, actually, when Trump's the one who didn't get enough votes. And so I think we've seen it happen before. It's a playbook that works. They'll do it again. And they're more likely to repeat a winning play than Democrats. And I think that's what people are really frustrated with now is like, we've seen them successfully challenge Donald Trump. We've seen them successfully reverse bad policies. And so why are they not willing to repeat the plays that work when the right in America is doing it over and over and over again and doing it to dismantle social programs that when they're gone, people will literally die. People rely on them to survive in America. And so it's really scary. And I think people are super frustrated. And so when I see some of the like hating on Democrats, I'm like, well, some of this is true. Like they are pretty weak right now. And so being on the left and paying attention to the news with that rational perspective is really exhausting these days. But if you're frustrated and confused, like you just haven't lost your humanity yet or your mind.
That's true. There's I'm a big comic book guy, Jessica, you know this. The comic book Watchmen, where there's a line where it's like, and if you are afraid in this moment, rest assured that's only a sign that you are completely sane. You know what I mean? You are not losing it. But speaking of the Democratic Party, I made a decision in my mind at one point. This was, I don't know, 2014 or 15, where I was like, there's both these parties are obviously very bad, both the main parties, but I believe firmly there's still a fighting chance within the Democratic Party. And I kind of believe that less and less every day, right? Like every now and then I'm like, no, yeah, this is where I should be fighting to have, reform and change and really get the right candidates in there. So we have a progressive caucus, because there's no hope of that on the right. So, I wonder though, do Republicans feel that way? Are there Republican voters just, if they are regretful and if they are at town halls getting fired up, which we've seen, are they thinking, I still have a chance of fixing this party? Trump is bad, let's say. This is probably few and far between, but if Trump is bad, there's a chance that we could get this back on track. I mean, even Nancy Pelosi was saying there are good Republicans and we need good Republicans, and Democrats largely are buddy with the so-called opposition. They're not being in opposition to them enough anyway, as it is. So do you think that there are voters out there who believe that ship hasn't sailed and there's a chance to, get the Republican Party back to true conservatism and less of a wrecking ball, no carpentry?
I think they exist. I don't know how hopeful they are. Like a lot of people in the Democratic Party that have just given up on it, but I think they exist. I went on the Bulwark podcast with Tim Miller,
Mm-hmm.
and so like I do know that there are real conservatives out there who are not like Trump Republicans. But I think it's more of a sign of the times economically that people in the United States don't want to vote for anything that's not populism or doesn't sound populist, because I think they're just sick of the elites. And so like in the Trump, faction of the Republican Party, they are the populists of the right. And I don't think there's an alternative. Like I really believe the only hope for the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is like a different kind of populism. Like if they could find a way to make right-wing populism say, well, we've heard you guys on the social issues and we understand change needs to happen slowly and it's happened too fast, and we're going to slowly change these institutions to sort of insulate you from the kind of problems that come about by doing change quickly, but we're sick of the elites, right? There's like a possibility for some kind of populist conservatism. I mean, you can imagine it. There's some cognitive dissonance, of course, but there isn't all politics, right? And so I think that like I haven't heard conservatives talk about that. I think, honestly, like Trump's discovered this populist message working because he just desperately wants to win, desperately wants power, is surrounded by people with that same agenda, oligarchs who know that if they're close to him and they stroke his ego and they say, we're on the same team, this is what we're going to do, he's listening to them. And so they're willing to work with any message that will keep them in power and get them more power. And then on the Democratic side, with the rise of like Bernie and AOC getting all these crowds and people who seem like normie libs on my timeline, like all for it, I think that the Democratic Party might realize earlier, especially David Miles Hogg just said he's willing to primary Democrats that are acting like Republicans, but Democrats that are not doing their job very well. And so I think the Democrats are realizing sooner like a populist message that can actually bring about a sustainable future in America. And they have a base that's willing to vote for them. Whereas the Republicans are so fractured that you could see like two parties come out of this of like real conservatives and like the populist far right. Whereas the Democrats, it seems more likely that they're in shape to take over the party, which I'm hopeful for. But I don't know how many like conservatives are hopeful that we'll have the party of John McCain back. I think that's dead now.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, if anything keeps me up at night, it's the wild thoughts I have that like if Donald Trump protected Social Security, the Democrats would never win again. But if the Democrats did that, they could lose. it's there's this weird mindset going on out there, and I think that whereas we may be under the impression that people are voting Republican because that's my party and I'm always going to vote Republican, what they actually might just be voting against somebody else at all times. And it's like I don't care if the Democrats did one or two good things. I don't care if Biden did some stuff that was very meaningful. They do all this other stuff that my hate doesn't jive with, right? And I can't get behind, right? And even if they don't realize that Biden was harsh on immigration, they believe that he wasn't and that Trump is. So like I feel like we can't change their vote, right? Like you can't get them to change their mind at the ballot box. That's unfortunate because if they aren't voting Republican, they're voting against the Democrats. But as long as they're regretful and as long as they're yelling at Chuck Grassley about calling Social Security entitlements or not, right? And that seemed like the whole room was against the one guy, which I love to see that. But as long as they're in this moment, can we get them to work with us on certain things like, maybe contacting their Congress people and going to these town halls to work with us on what they call populism, but what we call progressive policies, right? Like basic human rights, better wages, probably not things like well, I don't know. Yeah, maybe Social Security, wages, healthcare. I always waver on healthcare because there's so many conservatives that say it's a privilege, not a right. But I don't know if we're looking at things as swaying bottom up as opposed to left to right, maybe there is a chance to get conservative voters, so-called, to embrace healthcare. But can we get these folks, whether it's at neighbor to neighbor in the workplace or online or when it comes time to vote on issues, no matter what official they're going to try and elect, can we get them to work with progressives and the left at all?
Yeah. If we're going to be really real, I think like the main determining factor of this is whether or not the Democrats are going to be willing to let people who grew up regular working people in America lead. And I've seen even in some of the most progressive circles, the answer to that question is no. There's an implicit, almost seemingly mistrust in people who grew up working class as being on the other side, which you hear a lot of, like the criticism of the Democratic Party of being elite. I've worked in big progressive nonprofits. I've worked for big presidential campaigns. There's a mistrust there. And just like working class people look at elites and say, you remind me of my boss. You've never had my interests at heart. You're the people who ruin this country for people like us. There's not an accountability there. There's not a reckoning there among the Democrats. And that's necessary, I think, for them to be a big tent, to work with these people. Because to work with someone, you can't resent them. You have to respect and value their opinions. And so the way I see it is like there's a lot more regular people than there are like children of the political class and ruling class and the elites. And the Democrats would be really smart to start listening to the people saying, this is why we don't like you. This is why we don't vote for you. Here in Iowa, we have a candidate who announced literally yesterday, Nathan Sage. And when he was thinking about running, I went down there and met with him and talked to him for a couple hours. And his dad got arrested for a bounced $50 check. He grew up with his dad working at a factory and him thinking that was always going to be his life. And his only chance out, he kind of felt, was, joining the military. And he still believed in the promise and future of America. And that was something he was willing to do. And he went out and served. And he came back and he worked really hard. And now he's the executive director of the Chamber of Commerce in Knoxville here. And he sees like corporations just destroying small businesses and working class livelihood. And that is a candidate that the Democratic Party should be putting all of their money behind, because that's a message that resonates with everyone. And it's obvious. But the way I've heard it put is that a lot of the people in power in the Democratic Party are corporatists. They want to maintain this social order that allows corporations to thrive because that's where they get their money from. That's where their friends work. They have money in the stock market. And then on the right side, you have just the oligarchs basically calling the shots, running the party, and just so disconnected from the base. But if someone starts speaking to a working class message, there's a lot of voters up for grabs. It's very popular. The problem is they've tried it, and then like someone like Obama hasn't made good on a lot of their progressive populist promises. And so could it be too late for that message? Maybe, but I think that's what it's going to take to bring people over from the other side.
Yeah, and the Democrats are, these candidates who were primarying squad members over the summer last year were all too happy to take money from AIPAC and mega MAGA donors. And it's like, are you really going to sit there and go, hey, I can't help who gives me money? Yes, you can. You don't have to accept it. It's ridiculous. But they're like, oh, well, you need he with the most money wins. Well, maybe that doesn't have to be the case. Or if it is, what are you doing to garner grassroots contributions? Look at Kat Abu, right? She calls herself Abu. It's Abu Galaz. Abu Gaza? How do you say it?
I've only said Abu. I'm
glad that she shortens it for us, because I think it's Abu Ghazala, but I always get it wrong. Anyway, doing very well against her opponent right now as far as money goes. I don't like to go, yay, money, but it's all grassroots. It's not PAC money. So that is very, very cool. And I think that, whereas people get upset when AOC doesn't vote the way we would like them to. I always say, well, the real lesson with candidates like that, especially Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, was that she won against a corporate establishment long-term Democrat with grassroots campaigning. That's what we should all be focused on, not, oh, they got elected, they'll be our champion. Don't do that. Just look at how we can elect people and then keep that in mind when it comes time to potentially primary them and get somebody else in there. Well, while I have you here, just quickly, do you think the AOC and Bernie Sanders, is that a ticket? Are they ramping up to some sort of presidential bid or something like that? Or what do you think's going on?
I think it would be smart if it was a ticket. I mean, whether it's, Sanders AOC or AOC Sanders, I don't think it really matters. Bernie's liability is that he's old, but he has that love among conservatives. Like when I was here in Iowa, in southwestern Iowa, which culturally is more similar to the rural South than anything in the Midwest, there was a guy in a pickup truck that pulled up next to us in all of our Bernie t-shirts. We weren't, hiding who we are in any way. So we knew he was going to say something political because he looked at us with this kind of smile and he was like, listen, you guys, I'm with Trump, but I really like Bernie. I'd go for him over Biden any day. And so political spectrum wise, where people who study political science would place those candidates, it's like Biden's here, Bernie's here, and Biden's on the right side and Bernie's in the middle globally politically with that spectrum. And so why would someone voting for a candidate all the way over here on the right past Biden, why would they say I'd like this guy more than this guy? And it really is that working class cultural thing. I believe in someone who gets me. And so I just think Bernie on a ticket is smart. I know that he's older now. He probably wants to spend time with his grandkids, but we've seen the Bernie interviews. We know he feels this fight in his spirit and soul. And I think his grandkids, they visit him on the campaign trail. They know that's what he loves. And everyone else in America is working into retirement. So why not Bernie Sanders?
Yeah. And it's funny because it's like there are so many folks in Congress who are like, why don't you just retire? Why are you still here? You're not in the game. Where on the other hand, Bernie is still in the game. And it makes perfect sense why he's not retiring. Although, if there was somebody that could come along and take his place while he runs for higher office, by all means. And I think at one time, when it was Biden versus Trump back in 2019, so many people were saying Bernie can't beat Trump. Well, I think the way to look at it now, realistically, is, and I didn't agree with that, but the way to look at it now is, are people going to come out and vote for Bernie or the establishment Democrats candidate? That's how we need to start looking at this. Not, can he beat Trump? It's, are people even going to show up if it's not a worthwhile candidate from the Democratic Party? I think that's the way to look at it. I think as a lefty or a progressive or whatever, that I tend to hear a hint of hope and then I run with it. It turns into hopium and I start to imagine things that maybe aren't the case. Right. And so when I hear that Trump voters are regretful, I'm at first very glad to hear that. And then I start to wonder, is this just the mainstream media building something up that isn't true? Is this just the mainstream media once again putting white Republican voters in the spotlight? Before the election, they say, oh, these people are disenfranchised and left behind and they need a champion of the people. And then they vote and Trump wins and they go, well, that's a mandate, when it probably isn't a mandate of the people. And then they say, oh, and now he's leaving them behind again. Oh, these poor people, let's send a news truck with a makeup team and lighting over to their house and do an expose on another white lady, instead of focusing on entire communities that keep suffering from racism and economic disparity that their votes caused. So you get a lot of these anonymous social media posts and so-and-so said this around a story about one or two actual people. What do you think, man? Is this all fake? Is it real? How much should we invest in it?
Great question. I think it's a little bit of both. I recently saw an article. It was sent to me. I have to and I tried to find it again before we started. I was unable to locate it, but it was an article that kind of stated that only like 2% of Republicans are regretting their vote. Now, obviously, they did not poll everyone. I don't know who was polled. I don't know what the criteria was for any of these studies. And so there's always a lot of things that we have to sift through, I guess, when coming up with the correct analysis on these type of things. I do know that it's been very interesting seeing a lot of these GOP town halls, um, and the reaction a lot of these politicians are getting. There was one in North Carolina, I believe it was last night or the day before, where is in Asheville, and people were really upset about how the trade war and the tariffs are going to affect them. Um, I'm pretty sure there's going to be 5 million people affected by this new student loan thing that they have, and obviously that's not just relegated to either Democrat or Republican. These are just people. These are people who went to college, and as we know, college is not really affordable for most people in America at this point. And people, we are living in heavy times where people are not sure how they're going to make it, how they're going to make ends meet, and that's a real thing. And so I know, regardless to what any of these news reports are saying, there are people that are definitely feeling it. People that did vote for Trump, people that may be too embarrassed to say that I voted for Trump and now I regret it, right? But as we can see at these town halls, a lot of these Republican politicians aren't getting warm receptions from their own for their own voting base. So, yeah, I think it's a lot that we have to sift through. I think it's a little bit of well, it's all propaganda to an extent, but I think it's a little bit of mainstream media trying to control a narrative or push a narrative out there. And I think on the other end of the spectrum, it's people that are maybe have voted for Trump that are really afraid of what their future looks like. With all the protections being cut from federal government, and with Elon Musk, and where people talking about the impending oligarchy, and people are afraid. They're nervous, and I don't think that is just relegated to the Democratic Party and people who may have voted for Kamala Harris, or obviously leftist people who have voted for a third party. I think a lot of Republicans are as well. I even recently read about different farmers, right, that um, voted for Donald Trump, who are having buyer's remorse now because of how these tariffs are affecting their business. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think you're also going to have a demographic of Trump voters that will be too embarrassed to come out and show any type of regret for their vote.
Okay, those are great points. This is why I want to have you on the show. Anyone not watching your channel is missing out, because your interviews, while you let your guest cook, so to speak,
Yeah.
you ask all the right questions and you make great points. It is
Thank you.
highly worthwhile. I think everyone should be checking it out. But there's so let me just touch on this,
Mhm.
because you make me think of something that I can, it's appealing to me personally, this dynamic where the only reason I stay with the Democratic Party is because I feel like while both Republicans and Democrats are terrible, there's still a fighting chance in the Democratic Party. Now, I feel that less every day. They don't
Yeah.
give me enough reason to support them, especially the leadership. Do you think that there are Republicans who are still voters who are still in that party because they think there's a fighting chance? It's not Trump, it's just Elon Musk. If he gets rid of Elon Musk, everything will smooth out. Do you think that their vote actually changes?
I don't think their vote actually changes, but I do think it's interesting. And for us to, and it's interesting and it's important for us to look at a lot of the different factions that are fracturing off within MAGA. You know, not all Trump voters are seeing things the same. And we saw that with remember with the whole visa deal when it came to you know, tech workers being brought over from India and other places. There were, you know, one side of MAGA that was for it, and I think that side of MAGA, I think there's going to be a side of MAGA that whatever whatever this administration says, they are prepared to do the mental gymnastics to justify it all, right? And then there's another side of MAGA that is, I guess, trying to regulate what some of what you know, people like Elon Musk is doing, and so it's a kind of a weird thing that they have going on, but I don't think any of them are actually prepared to leave the Republican Party.
There were even people who were of Hispanic background saying,
Yeah. Mhm.
you know, he's not gonna deport us. We're doing everything right. We're following the rules. And then like he's
Yeah.
sending
Mhm.
actual citizens out of here, people who haven't done anything wrong without due process. And so you can see even the people who are like, yeah, ICE, go get them, are now like, uh-oh, they could be getting anybody, and they're not sending them back. Like that's wild.
Yeah.
But like at the same time, there was the guy who he was a white male Trump voter. He and his new wife, who was going through the immigration process, she was becoming a citizen. Like, you can't say you're not doing it if you're in the process of doing it. They were coming back from Puerto Rico where they were on their honeymoon. ICE
Mhm.
was at the airport. They said, hey, look, brown person coming from Puerto Rico, which isn't like a foreign land.
Right.
They detained her, and she's still detained. He said he trusts Trump to do the right thing.
Mm.
A lot of, and for that matter, she said from the detention center, she trusts him to do the right thing. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
See
if ever
that.
there's a time to lose trust.
Yeah, see, that makes no sense to me. Again, that's that. So a lot of this stuff is cult-like, right?
Mhm.
We've seen a lot of these evangelicals treat and treat Trump as if he is the second coming of their Messiah, right?
Yeah, there it is.
And I think a lot of people have gravitated towards this way of viewing Donald Trump. It's he's bigger than president of the United States to them. He is, and he's been deified in a lot of ways. I see, I've seen so many instances like there was didn't they like didn't somebody like in the like make a sculpture of him where they put his head on Julius Caesar's body, or and like they do
I'm
weird
sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do weird stuff
Yeah.
like that all the time. And so as you know, if you're in a cult, you're not thinking rationally, right?
Right.
And so these people are in a cult, and we have to treat it like they are in a cult. And so that woman's husband, or who has been deported wrongly or held by ICE wrongly, they will still have faith in that cult leader because the whole cult is predicated on this undying, unwavering loyalty and faith in a leader, in which is Donald Trump. And so it sounds weird to people who think rationally, but we're not talking about people who think rationally. We're talking about people who are in a cult, pretty much. And
Who say Trump has a plan for us as if it's God.
yeah,
Unless they refuse to separate church and state, there's no such thing as faith-based politics. That's not real.
right.
And that is a sign that people are just like investing too much confidence in a politician who, by the way, is resisting. Even Steve Bannon, of all people, is recommending that Trump tax moderate millionaires, like not even the top rich people, but just new millionaires. He won't even tax them. And he's saying if you do, the Bernie Sanders AOC oligarchy tour is done for. They don't have a case to be made because you can just say, hey, I'm taxing people. Well, if you think about it, he can just say he's taxing them even if he isn't. And his his base support will just fall in line with the BS lies and go, no, it's true. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. And people often say that any step away from their faith is a step toward damnation, you know, in extreme cases. And I think that people think that about the Republican Party. And that's why I don't think that they're going to change their ways. But do you see, as long as they're fractured, as long as there's splintering and moments where we could exploit that fracture, can we get them to work with us on certain policy like Social Security, saving the USPS, right? The post office, better wages, healthcare. Can we get them to pester their Congress people about progressive policies?
That's a great question. I don't really know if we can. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's not to say that some of the members of MAGA don't care about these things, right? But they look at anybody who is not a part of MAGA as an enemy in a lot of cases. It's and so, yeah, I think as far as I'm always wary about working when it comes to quote unquote working with them, right? Because these are people that don't have any issues with, what's happening with ICE. They don't have any issues, and well, until they realized it started affecting them with, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, right? They don't have any issues where these things aren't even political issues. For me, these issues are about being humane and seeing the humanity in others, right? And so when it comes to quote unquote working with them, it's kind of tough. For me personally, I'll pass, right? And but I will obviously hope that they do fight for things such as you know healthcare and all of the things that are being affected by this Trump administration. It goes back to class solidarity, right? What a lot of times historically, um, working class people that have the same politics as what MAGA has, they will betray any class solidarity and put whiteness over it.
Yep.
And so it's tough to organize with people like that. We have a history of this, right? Within a lot of labor movements and things of that nature. So it's tough. I think they would have to kind of come to the realization that these billionaires uh, don't mean them any good either, and kind of begin to build and organize for themselves, because it's hard to organize with someone who may not see or recognize your humanity, right? And so I wouldn't put myself in harm's way that way.
I hear you 100%. It's not enough that they're regretful because it's typically around their own personal experience. And it's not as if, like, it would be a lot different
Mhm.
if there was like new organizations popping up saying we were Republicans and now we realize that shit was racist and we're done with it. And
Right,
like we were self-centered and we're
right.
sorry. And we
Mhm,
know that people aren't going to be willing to lock arms with us right away, but we're
mhm.
here for solidarity's sake. That would be different. Nobody's doing that.
Absolutely.
Just to make a note, I haven't seen any of that. The bottom up, though, if we're going to start to focus on bottom up instead of left and right, just being involved in labor organizing might be a way of working with the other side without having to lock arms or rely on them,
Yeah.
in the hopes that they're trying to unionize in their own workplace. So there
Mhm.
are these little microscopic
I
ways.
think we saw that
It
with
might be too
Amazon,
surgical.
with Chris Smalls and
Yeah.
Amazon then, right? I think, yeah, I absolutely agree with you 100%. I meant more of, I'm not going knocking on doors
Nah, yeah, I got it.
trying to convert anyone, right? That's not my job. And they should, again, we continue to do what we do in media. We continue to have conversations offline. We continue to be a part of organizations and community work and be one with our community, and so, you know, doing that, the people will come, right? The people that are serious and the people that want to see a better world, they'll gravitate towards that. A lot of times when, you know, again, I just think we should definitely be wary sometimes of, you know, who we are quote unquote organizing with. Doesn't mean that we are not organizing for the working class, right? But we don't want anybody that would, you know, have the inclination of destroying everything we work for over some type of emotional thing that they can't get over about people who are different from them.
Yeah, it's like you could say they seem to have perhaps accidentally voted against their own self-interest while deliberately voting against everyone else's best interest. Like at
Well,
the end of the day, they're
that's
on
the
their own,
thing.
really.
But I'm waiting. But that's my thing. I thought it would be very obvious to them, right?
Yeah.
This what it's been 4 months, right, since he's been in office. This has been the longest 4 months of any presidency I've ever seen in my life,
Yeah.
right? There's so much that has happened. And again, to your original question that you asked before, I do think some people who voted for him are having obviously second thoughts when a lot of these different things are starting to hit home. It's affecting people's businesses. It's affecting people's jobs. You know, it's affecting people's money, their credit scores. You know, I saw something the other day about, you know, only 4 out of 10 people who, out of that 5 million, who are, you know, going to have to start back, you know, paying their student loans to the collections. Like only 4 out of 10 are caught up. And so, as we know, once that hits their credit score, I mean their credit report, their credit score is going to drop. It's going to make getting housing more difficult. It's going to make getting automobile more difficult. It just makes your life harder, right? And when things like that keep happening, hopefully they become politicized and radicalized. Um, they would again have to first get over the all right. Matter of fact, let's think about it like this. How easy is it for most people to get out of a cult?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's not easy because there's a certain level of brainwashing that happens.
You
Uh,
need deprogramming. Like
deep
there are experts in that, right? Like you can't just do
absolutely.
it.
Right. And you know, your people are they are cult leaders usually isolate cult members from their family. Well, in this case, you know, this cult has isolated themselves from anybody who is not MAGA. So all of the information they get comes from this one big MAGA echo chamber. And so a deprogramming does have to take place. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like or how that happens, but I know just from, you know, reading and watching documentaries on this subject, it's definitely not easy for people to leave cults, man. Because, and I do honestly believe that this is a cult, and it's very cult-like in the way it moves.
Joining me now for the next installment in the ongoing Real Deal series, where I bring on guests to help me sort out the reality of regretful Trump voters, please welcome to the show the host of Raw News and Politics, GINA Bonanno. GINA, thanks for being here. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
I'm great, and I am a huge fan of your YouTube videos. I share them with my audience regularly,
Thank
especially
you.
your frequent coverage of the what I call so-called regretful Trump voter. I've been speaking with guests about this topic, and I appreciate you joining me to keep the discussion going and to keep me from drifting off into what I call lefty fantasy land. And what I mean by that is there's always a tendency for me and other progressives to um, hear even a hint of hopefulness and then run with it and let it turn
Mhm.
into hopium. And that's
Yeah.
not wise or realistic to rely on that. So the more we hear about so-called Trump, regretful Trump voters and MAGA supposedly finding themselves in the FAFO phase, the
Mhm.
more I feel myself becoming suspicious, mainly of the mainstream media. Do you think that there's anything to that skepticism, or am I being unrealistic? Because it's a lot of anonymous sources, social media posts, and who knows who's
Mhm.
hiding behind that anonymity. Every now and then you hear about an actual person, but then they sprinkle in all these other, you know, anonymous voices, for lack of a better term. So what,
Yeah.
can you check my cynicism on this? Where am I at?
I'll try to. I'm sure there's always going to be some hoaxes. There's always going to be people out there trying to play the system and trying to see how many people they can get to share their fake story. So I'm sure there's some of it going on. I do know that there are real people who regret it. I mean, I interviewed one of them. I don't know if you saw my interview with Ken Price.
Mhm.
We've kept in touch, and actually, there are right wingers now who are saying that he's a paid actor, and he thinks that's hysterical. He messaged me and sent me a link to the video, and he said, "Can you believe these idiots? They think I'm being paid for this." So, there definitely are regrets out there, and I like to say, and I know it's probably a little rude sometimes, but I like to say you can always tell from the way they're written whether they're real or not.
Oh,
um,
right.
some of
Do
them
you
are,
think the more misspellings and typos, the more real?
yeah, I
Okay.
tend to think so.
I always thought that was a sign that it was a bot or fake, but
Oh, yeah, no, I
I see where
mean,
you're going. Yeah, that
yeah,
there's something
based
to
on
that.
the comments that I get on my show.
I mean, if they're unintelligent enough to vote for Donald Trump more than once, even
Yeah,
if I mean, because you had to have been regretful after the first time, right? But and to keep doing it, then yeah, okay, maybe you're
yeah.
lacking in other areas. I'll go with you on that. But do you think the media, the mainstream media, would you put it past them to come up with manufactured hot topics? And because to me, you're basically keeping, not you, but in general, the mainstream media is
Mhm.
basically keeping essentially a small group of white voters in the spotlight before, during, and after elections, where it's like beforehand, it's, oh, they need a hero of the people. They need somebody to
Mhm.
represent them. They're disenfranchised and forgotten. And then, Trump gets elected and they're like, oh, there's a mandate. Is there a mandate? I don't know about if that's true, if there was that many people. And then they say, oh,
Right.
he's leaving them behind. Let's send a camera crew and hair and makeup to their house and we'll do a little expose on them. And it's like, this is just one person where whole communities continue to suffer because of that one person's vote. So do you think
Yeah.
that the mainstream media is just, inclined to make topics for clicks and views and stuff like that?
Oh, I mean, they definitely are. I- and you know, I hate to show any empathy for mainstream media because they don't typically deserve it. But I know that the way they pose things, is done because they can't be snarky and rude to these people, or nobody else would come on the show.
Good point.
So I think that it maybe comes across as them being more empathetic than when the cameras are off.
That's a
I
good point.
wonder how many of these people on CNN and other mainstream media shows are like, snickering after the cameras stop rolling. Like,
Yeah.
you dumbass. What were you thinking?
Yeah. They're packing up the van going, we can't get out of here soon enough. Like,
Yeah.
I'm so sick of covering.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you got to remember, I have to remember there are humans behind this. No one's
Yeah.
made that point yet, Gina. Good point.
Well,
Um,
and the other thing is, I do have empathy for the people who truly are just so busy, I mean, I was a single mom for many years. And so I know what it's like to work full time. You're stressed out. You don't know how you're going to make the bills the next month. You're going to bed with that worry. The last thing you have on your mind is, gee, I wonder what's going on in politics. When you're just running, 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 trying to take care of kids, getting food on the table at night, cooking, cleaning, there are a lot of people out there who don't have time to watch the news, like we do obsessively,
Right.
which is probably
It's true.
unhealthy. And so, yeah, I think there are people who got tricked. I think there are people who, I think there's a variety of Trump supporters. So any who come forward like Ken and who are willing to say, you know what, I screwed up. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how bad it was going to be. I embrace those people, So do I also go, Jesus, what were you thinking? Yeah, of course, But if they're willing to have the strength of character and be brave enough to come forward and say, yeah, I messed up, like, Ken did and so many other people, I'm willing to accept them. We can be friends. I mean, I've even become friends with Pam Hemphill, who was one of the January 6th defendants.
I was going to say,
convicts.
I interviewed Pam. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I've had her on the show a couple times. We've remained in contact, and, she shares my stuff. I share her stuff. So yeah. To me, if we can't accept people when they finally do realize it and step forward, then what is the incentive for anyone to do so?
I agree. If memory serves, Pam was inclined to vote Republican still, like under the impression that there were still good Republicans. And I wonder, I always say, if they're good people, why are they Republican? But do you think ultimately, and Pam's great, like, and she gets a lot of flack from people that she
From
used
both
to,
sides.
yeah, and like, no, I really worry for her safety. But and that just shows the world we live in. But
Yeah.
do you think that these because there are a lot of people, like there was a gentleman and his wife coming back from their honeymoon. He is a white male Trump supporter. She is in the process of gaining citizenship, doing it all just by the book correctly, according to them. They're coming back from Puerto Rico, and ICE detained her. And as far as I know, she's still detained. And she is saying from detainment, she thinks Trump will do the right thing. And he's saying, well, I just think that they should do this more surgically and less broad strokes. Do you think that this changes anything? Are they too cult-like to change their vote when they get the next opportunity, or would they just keep putting the same, hopefully not get a chance to vote for Trump again, but would they vote for him again if they could?
Oh, I think there's definitely the majority would. Even the people that it's affecting negatively. And I go back to it being a matter of pride, not having strength of character, not feeling, self-assured enough, and just having this sick need to own the libs and, never admit that you've made a mistake. I mean, unfortunately, they're like that because of Trump, or they were already like that, and that's why they like him, because, like attracts like. So an inability to just, be strong enough, be secure enough in yourself to go, yeah, I screwed up and I see it now, and it was a mistake. But yeah, and actually I think his wife was just released about a week or two ago.
Oh, good.
So,
okay.
They had her in there for almost 2 months, and they're still on his side. I mean,
it's incredible.
No rhyme or reason. Now, Pam, I think, has changed her opinion.
Oh, good.
Because when she was on my show the first time, I really pressed her because none of her beliefs really line up with the Republican Party. And so I started kind of pulling on those threads with her. I mean, she's pro-choice. She's, for interracial relationships, and she's not a racist person. She really didn't have, when I started going through all the different things that MAGA Republicans now stand for, and I try to make that distinction because I think there are traditional Republicans who are not like this, but she really didn't have a lot of views that aligned with the Republican Party. So I think that she has since changed her mind. I think she even changed her political affiliation.
Yeah, that would make sense because I agree with you that she didn't strike me. She struck me as somebody who was buying into they're going to change Washington. They're going to reform government. And why wouldn't she stick with those beliefs? Because that's kind of what we all want, right? Like we need that. And it's just a matter of time before hopefully these folks see that they're being duped and change their ways. But
yeah,
went to jail for it. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's
And
talk about commitment.
For what little she did. I mean, she was literally just one of those people who walked in, kind of chanted a little bit and then left. And so, yeah, she unfortunately got a tough judge who gave her 2 months. But, most of those cases, most of the people who did what she did just got a slap on the wrist. They got, just, I think maybe, a few months of probation, maybe a year or two. So,
and then they were pardoned.
Does
it? Okay. So let's say that it's all true and that there's like just huge swaths of regretful Trump voters. And let's also say, just speculating, that they won't change their vote and that it's not going to make any difference. In the meantime, do you think that we can get them to come together with us and fight our elected officials and pester them for agreed upon policy, like protecting Social Security, saving the post office from being privatized, better wages, healthcare? Is there any, like, whatever it is, pick one or anything, but is there any hope in getting these folks to work with us on this stuff in a way that allows us on the left to exploit these fractures and weak spots now that they are regretful?
I do. I think that there are a number. I think that there are probably millions of people because, as I was saying the other day on my show, if you look at the polling in various polls, there's like 2 to 3% of Trump voters 2024 Trump voters who are now regretful. There was a poll that just came out yesterday. I'm doing a show on it today. Wasn't Gallup, I forget which one it was, but there were, if you look at the crosstabs, there were quite a few people who voted for Trump who are turning against him, even on his signature issues like immigration, which is really interesting. So in this poll that I'm going to do today, he was underwater on everything: immigration, the economy, inflation, so forth. So I think there are, and even if you take the lowest number, 2 to 3% of people who now regret their vote, that's millions. 2 to 3% of the, what did he win? 73 million votes or something. So it's substantial. I mean, he didn't win by that much. I think he won by about 1.5 million votes. So that's more than his win over Kamala Harris. But again, you're going to run into different factions of his base because you've got the traditional Republicans who went with him because, I can't vote for Commie Kamala. I can't go with someone who's this flaming liberal and, this anarchist.
Right.
So
they vote against Democrats as much as they vote for something else.
Right. Yeah. And just like we do on the left. And so I think those people are more persuadable. The people that I often see in swing voter focus groups, I think they are definitely willing to vote for Democrats and willing to vote against the Republican Party now. People who voted for Biden in 2020 and then went for Trump in 2024, because they're not diehard, MAGA people. But then you do have some others who are like, no, what are you going to do for me? They're the ones that they don't really like either party, I think, but they thought that Donald Trump was some genius businessman, which is hysterical.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and they had this fantasy in their head about what his economy was like when he was in office before. But again, they're not necessarily people who are willing to go for Democrats. They still think that Democrats are, too far to the left, or aren't willing to offer anything to the public, or, are completely corrupt, which is there.
Yeah.
Is there a part of the Democratic Party that is completely corrupt and just as bad as Republicans? Absolutely. They're not wrong in that. But we have far more good people, progressives, who don't take corporate money, who are honest, who are not stock trading on insider information. You don't have any of those people in the Republican Party.
And like, they're not even hiding it. But I think
Yeah.
that there is something to be said for, because the reason why, like, I came to a point in my life as an adult where I said, well, obviously both parties are corrupt, but there's more of a fighting chance on the Democrat side than on the Republican side for reform and getting real grassroots candidates and honest people in office, not just career politicians. And I wonder how many people think that on the Republican side, how many people are under the impression that that ship has not yet sailed when it has. But let me ask you this. It's my last question. And I feel like we could talk about this at length. So if there's ever an opportunity to do it again, I would be all for it.
Sure.
But I get the impression that you're not going to stop reporting on this. You're not going to stop covering these moments and highlighting them. And I don't think you should. But is there a point in time, or do you not, whether you can identify that point in time or not, do you imagine a time where you will shift focus, and would that focus remain on voters and maybe segue to people who don't vote and why they don't vote, and people who are just regretful of politics and voting in general, not necessarily from one party or the other? Do you see that happening, or is there no value to that?
No, I think there is value to it. In fact, I did one show, I think it was BuzzFeed news outlet, that they put out a question to people who didn't vote in 2024 and asked them if they had any regrets. And they got, of course, all over the map comments, but there were quite a few people who did not vote, who are now very angry at themselves, very, just forlorn and just are just so upset at what's happening. And it got a ton of views on my site because I think, people wanted to hear from them as well. Like, what were you thinking? Why would you do this? And honestly, a lot of it with these people, it was, well, I live in such a solid blue state. It didn't really matter if I came out. I live in such a solid red state. It wouldn't have made a difference. So the Electoral College is just the bane of our existence. I mean, it's destroying politics. It really is, because so many people just go, what does it matter? And then you end up with Donald Trump, with a popular win. And then you get all of these people falling all over themselves, kissing his ass, kissing his feet, because they think he has this huge, quote unquote, mandate that he really doesn't have. So,
And
he won a plurality, but he did not win a majority. And people seem to miss that point all the time.
And it's not as if, like, well, just wait 4 years and we'll have a new guy and we'll start over, because some of the things that they're breaking are going to take a lot longer than 4 years to fix. And there's historical context for that. Universities and school systems revising their curriculum
Yeah.
to adhere to, fascist and authoritarian demands that's not the kind of thing that you can just quickly reverse. It takes
Yeah.
decades. And so there's a lot of consequences to being on the sidelines. Even still, those folks can call their local Congress people and
Yeah.
start making up for their regret. Gina, thank you so much for giving me this time and for talking to me about this.
Oh, no
These
problem.
Your responses help inform the next conversation I have with somebody in the coming week. So I really do appreciate it. I'm
problem.
going to put links to all your stuff in the description of this video, and I'll present it to the audience during a live stream where I'll be able to talk about it more. But is there anything that you want to promote or plug before we wrap?
Yeah, nothing to promote or plug. I just, one last point I wanted to make about the regrets videos and why I choose to continue doing them. Couple reasons. I mean, number one, I think that it's something people on the left need right now. We took such an ass kicking in the election, losing all of Congress and the White House, and it was just so demoralizing. And I think it goes back to a basic need that humans have to feel like someone gets it when they've done something wrong. I mean, everyone in the world has been hurt at some point by someone, and you just want that person to come forward and say, oh my God, I get it. I hurt you. I'm so sorry. I screwed up. You just want that Schadenfreude,
Yeah.
And so I think it's soothing to people on the left. I think it helps. And then I also think that it helps to show, it kind of creates that permission structure for other people to go, okay, I'm not alone in feeling like I regret my vote. I'm not the only one who thinks that this is out of control and what he's doing is insane and he's hurting people. And kind of like I said the other day on my show, it allows people to come out of the MAGA closet. So
Right. That's a great point. And it's not the only content you're making. So it's not as if you're just sticking with that one aspect of what's going on out there. You're doing the good work by covering a lot of topics. And you're very candid and real about it. My viewers love to hear you laugh when you're in the middle of these stories and to have like a real world aspect to it. And I've gotten some of that from you today, reminding me that the mainstream media isn't just some robotic entity. There are actual people doing the work and it's a job. So that is worth remembering. So I really appreciate that aspect of it. And I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my honor. Thanks.